Hello, Documentation Nation. We're resuming work on running the Next.js documentation and learning how to use this framework. If you missed the first video where we went through basic setup and using link to navigate between pages, I'll link above. So the first video, you can go back and check that out before following on and catching up where we are today, where we're going to review assets, metadata, and CSS. So let's get started. The second page we added currently does not have styling. Let's add some CSS to that page, right? So we've got our first post page here, which we can navigate to. Here's our first post. Next.js has built-in support for CSS and SASS. For this course, we'll use CSS. The lesson will talk about how Next.js handles static assets like images and page metadata like the title tag. What you'll learn in this lesson. In this lesson, you'll learn how to add static files, how to customize what goes inside the head for each page, how to create a reusable React component, which is styled using CSS modules, how to add global CSS in pages/_app.js, and some useful tips for styling in Next.js. Their recommended prerequisite in here is some basic CSS knowledge. Of course, we'll go over how to add CSS in Next.js, but it won't cover CSS fundamentals. So maybe I can add some color as we go through CSS work here. I guess I'll open this even though I had the other two additional documents open and I did not look at those at all yet. So let's continue. Assets, metadata, and CSS. Next.js can serve static assets like images under the top level public directory. So we are within our public directory here. We see that's where they've got the favicon and this SVG file. So that's going to be, which if you're using other frameworks or other setups, this is pretty much what you're used to, right? Your static assets going in something like a public folder. Files inside public can be referenced from the root of the application, similar to pages. Public directory is also useful for robots.txt, Google site verification, and any other static assets. All right, cool. First, let's retrieve your profile picture. Download your profile picture in .jpeg format or use this file. Let's do that. What is this file? All right. We have an interesting picture here. Do we want to use something more fun? Let's use something more fun. I found a nice picture of Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks, so we're going to go ahead and use that for our profile image. There's our Dale Cooper.jpg. Create an images directory inside the public folder directory. All right. So let's do that. New folder, images. And I guess we'll rename this just for the sake of having an easier name to work with. Profile. We'll throw that in our images folder. Yes, please. It'd be around 400 pixels by 400 pixels. I think we're a little bit bigger than that, but we'll see what happens. So adding this thing, unoptimized image with regular HTML, you would add your profile picture as follows. We should all be familiar with our image tag. However, this means you have to manually handle ensuring your image is responsive on different screen sizes. Yes. Optimizing your images with a third-party tool or library. Only loading images when they enter the viewport. Also, yes. And more. Instead, Next.js provides an image component out of the box to handle this for you. Okay. Next image is an extension of the HTML image element. Evolved for the modern web. Next.js also has support for image optimization by default. This allows for resizing, optimizing, and serving images in modern formats like WebP when the browser supports it. This avoids shipping large images to devices with a smaller viewport, which is great. It also allows Next.js to automatically adopt future image formats and serve them to browsers that support these formats. So this is basically saying that images are only loaded as they enter the viewport, which is really cool. And they optimize their loading. That helps Google search rankings, which is also really excellent. And this is just out of the box functionality. So very cool. Here's an example using next image to display our profile picture. The height and width prop should be the desired rendering size with an aspect ratio identical to the source image. What was my image size? So our image dimensions here are 770 by 517 width then height. So I'm going to keep this open just for reference. Let's go ahead and do that here. Does it care where we do this? We'll use this component later in polishing layout. No need to copy it yet. But I want to play around with it. So I'm going to do that. We'll just throw it in the first post over here and just see what happens. I mean, it's just going to give us our image, right? But why not play around with it? and see what it looks like for us. We'll go ahead and just throw this in here, do our image tag. And within that tag, it takes props, right? Where, oh, it's also self-closing, so I don't need this. I can do that, right? Just like every image tag. We can do our source, which right now is our slash, the autocomplete here, but that's okay. JPEG. And I don't have to dot my way up a directory, right? I can just, no matter where I am, just automatically call that root. Sounded like what it said to us before. And then we can set our height and our width using brackets, right? We're in JavaScript land here. Oops. And an alt tag. Now there's probably, we're not going to say your name, I'm going to say Dale Cooper. There's probably some sort of extension I can use here with Next.js. It's going to help me navigating some of these things, right? With making sure I have an alt tag, but nothing mentioned yet, so we're not going to go outside the bounds here. We're going to stick with the documentation. My width is 770 and my height is 517. We'll save that and let's go look at our page here. I've got a loading icon on the bottom. There's our boy Dale Cooper. Let's try messing with some of these. This isn't any different than doing a style tag or styling directly on an image, right? So I don't think this is going to look good at all, but let's just shrink this down and just see that we can. Cool, that's gross, but all right, we've effectively learned how to use this image here. Quick review. What does the next image simplify for you? Uploading and storing, resizing and optimizing, cropping and color correcting, resizing and optimizing. I'm sorry if I'm giving away the answers here. Feel free to pause your video at any time and answer on your own. Metadata. What if we wanted to modify the metadata of a page, such as the title, HTML tag? Title is part of the head. HTML tag, so let's dive in how we can modify the head tag in Next.js page. Open pages, index.js. Boom, we are there. So they've got head here, right? And we've got title and we've got a link in there. Notice that head is used instead of the lowercase head, right? Head is a React component that is built into Next.js. So we caught that in our first video. And we saw that, of course, because of the import up top as well. You can import head component from the next/head module. Adding head to first post.js. So we want to go do that. We want to import head here. Import head from next/head. Cool. Then update the exported first post component to include the head component. For now, we'll just add the title tag. So we're in our fragment here. We'll throw head in there. And within that, we're going to have title. And this is just going to say first posty boy. So now if we access this thing, I'm going to close a bunch of these so we can maybe see a bigger browser tag. First posty boy. It's not going to resize for me, but we've got our updated title there. That's nice. And I'm not going to dive into developer tools as we know this is going to work for us. So cool. Let's continue on. Third-party JavaScript refers to any scripts that are added from a third-party source. Usually third-party scripts are included in order to introduce newer functionality into a site and does not need to be written from scratch, such as analytics, ads, and customer support widgets. Cool. Let's dive into how we can add third-party JavaScript. Open our first post. We're there. We're in our head here. We can drop this down a little bit. In addition to metadata, scripts that need to load and execute as soon as possible are usually added within the head of the page, right? We know this because we know that anything's going to load in a top down, right? And if you got your scripts up top, you can do a couple of things, right? You can load with script, you can load with script defer. The challenge if you load with script up top is that if you need a script to, if you're writing that script and you need that script to grab something on your page, right? Like if you're doing find element by ID or one of those, and you're manipulating the DOM, if you load that script before your HTML loads, you're not going to be able to manipulate that HTML and you're not going to work on that correctly, right? So you would do script defer, or you would load your script at the bottom of your page before your closing tag. But here we're just loading up top because this third-party script shouldn't need to access anything specific on our page. So in addition to metadata scripts, we need to load and execute as soon as possible, usually added within the head of the page. Using a regular HTML script element, this script would be added as follows. So this is a standard script. So we're going to do something different, right? We're alluding to a script command here, a script component. This script contains Facebook SDK, which is commonly used to introduce Facebook social plugins and other functionality. Although this works, including scripts in this manner does not give a clear idea of when it would load with respect to other JavaScript code fetched on the same page, right? Again, top down. Using the script component. Next/script is an extension of the HTML script element. It optimizes when scripts are fetched and executed. In the same file, we add, let's add our script. Let's import script from next/script. We see a pattern here of how we do these imports. Now let's put a script in there within, it's right after our head. So it doesn't go within the head. It just has its own thing, right? So there's our script component and also self-closing. So let's undo that. And I guess let's just go ahead and do this. Here we've got some props popping up for me. Now I don't know if I don't know about TypeScript on this yet, right? But this is popping up already. We've got source, which I'm just going to go, can I copy this? Ooh, I can. Here's our source. We've got strategy, which is lazy on load. And then we've got a function here for the on load prop, an anonymous function, which is just going to console.log and let us know that this is loaded, right? Console.log, script loads correctly. Window.fb has been populated. All right, let's go ahead and do that. I'm not going to type all this out. Let's just go ahead and copy this. Let's save that. And we should immediately, we'll go back and we'll read this in a second. But I'm assuming with our save, this is going to reload for us. And let's look in our console. There we go. With the back and forth, we've got script loaded correctly. Window.fb has been populated. And this is nice. We can see all of our fast refresh stuff done in here as well, right? And build times. Notice that a few additional properties have been defined in the script component. We have noticed. Let's talk about them. Strategy controls when the third-party script should load. The value of lazy on load tells Next.js to load this particular script lazily during browser idle time. Okay. Lazy means to load during browser idle time. Interesting, and we should note that. OnLoad is used to run any JavaScript code immediately after the script has finished loading. In this example, we log a message so it says it's loaded. So all this is doing for us is it's saying as soon as this script loads, that's when onLoad kicks on and just says, well, all we're doing is console.logging. And notice that this is a function, right? This is like, if you're using React, this is like your onClick. This is like your onChange, where we call a function. We could move this function somewhere else if we wanted to, and we should be able to, right? And just say like, let's call this load func equals a function. We'll use an arrow function. And this is the same thing. We'll just console log this whole bit. Oops, I didn't catch that. And then I should also just be able to replace this just with load func like we normally do in React land. And let's go back to first posty boy. Here's our console. Let's go back home. Let's reload everything. Go to our page. There you go. Script loaded correctly, right? So this is all working just as React. So definitely want to know React before you dive into Next.js stuff. But this is a nice, easy transition for us because we're familiar with React and we're just diving into what's going on. Not quite yet at the point that I'm excited, which is the backend stuff. But we're getting there. This is good stuff to know. Only uses a contrived example to show you how to use third-party apps. Yeah, cool. So what does next script simplify for you? Loading third-party scripts. Great. Good job. We are learning CSS styling. Now let's talk about CSS. Yes. As you can see, our next page looks like junk. Our index page, as you can see, our index page, localhost 3000, already has some styles. Our new page looks like garbage. If you look at your file structure, you'll see a folder called styles. And we do, with 2 CSS files, a global style sheet, and a CSS module, home.module.css. We have them, we're good. CSS modules allow you to locally scope CSS at the component level by automatically creating unique class names. This allows you to use the same CSS class name in different files without worrying about class name collisions, which is interesting, right? Because if you have different React components, you just want to be very careful about what classes, if you're using class-specific styling, you know, if you have one component that has my module class name and you have another component that also has my module as a class name in your CSS, that's going to be picked up by both. If you don't want that, you're in trouble. If you want that, cool. And this kind of thing helps us from doing that. Another framework, Svelte, does something similar where your CSS styling is within the component itself, within the file, just in a big CSS tag. I forget the specific way they do it, but I didn't particularly like doing that in Svelte. I don't want my files to be super long. I don't really like having a whole style section within the Svelte framework. I know it's a big reason to use the Svelte framework, but it didn't super appeal to me. I like a lot of other things about Svelte, but not so much that. So this is nice. So in addition to CSS modules, you can style your Next.js application in a variety of ways, including Sass, which allows you to import CSS and SCSS files, post CSS libraries like Tailwind, CSS in JS like styled JSX styled components, which styled components is another one I want to dive into at some point. I'm familiar enough with them, and Emotion, which works similarly to styled components. If you're using MUI, you want to use Emotion. In this lesson, we'll talk about how to use CSS modules and Sass in Next.js. Let's dive in. Yes, let's do that. Layout component. First, let's create a layout component, which will be shared across all pages. Create a top-level directory called components. This wants me to make a new folder in here called components. Done. Inside components, create a file called layout.js with the following content. Layout.js. And we're going to make our export default function layout, which has a prop of children. And we return just a div with our children rendered. If you didn't follow along with the documentation nation for React, which is currently in progress, I'll put a link up top for that as well. When we're doing children in this way, and what we're going to end up having is a layout tag, right? And then we'll put whatever information in here, and that's, oops, not like that. And that's going to be our child that gets rendered here using that child tag. Then open pages, posts, first post.js, and add an import for the layout component and make it the outermost component. So they're doing, so everything, including the head, is going to be in there. So that's interesting to know. Now remember what we've got so far. We've got a pages directory, which is going to be our navigation, so to speak, right? And now we've got components, which we're used to in React just to build out individual components. So let's go to our, it wants us to go to our first post, which their example doesn't have the image yet, but we do. So we're going to just leave it for now. And just like anything else, we're going to import layout. And I get my autocomplete I can. And then I no longer need this fragment. So let's just use that. And we've got layout there. Just for reference, I do have an extension that changes my closing tag for me, which is nice. Sometimes it's a little bit finicky, but does do that for me. What is that called? Auto rename tag? That's the one if you're interested. Let's go look at it real quick. Auto rename tag. So super useful, super helpful, because sometimes it's going to cause you problems and trip you up. All right, so we've added our layout tag, and all that's doing for us now is all of this is now considered children to render within a div that has nothing. It's just a div, right? There's no class or anything on there yet. Now let's add some styles to the layout component. To do so, we'll use CSS modules, which lets you import CSS files in a React component. Within component, create a file called layout.module.css. So that's our naming convention here now, layout.module.css. And we're just going to make .container, so our class of, not contour, container. And max width, we're going to do a property there of 36 rem. Padding, do I get any kind of autocomplete here? Yes, wonderful. Of course, I'm in CSS. 0 and 1. And margin, which we're going to do, not max resolution, margin, which we're going to do 3, auto, and 6. Okay, so remember that when you're doing shorthand stuff, right, with padding, just so we can refresh our CSS stuff, we've got a max width here, so that's as large as that thing can go wide. Padding, with our directions on padding, remember if you're typing these things out in this way, you're going to have your top, you're going to have your right, your bottom, and your left. And just for some reference here, we're opening MDN documentation, right, from Mozilla. And here's an example of padding with all 4, right? So we've got your 10 pixels, right, which is our top. If I change that to 100, you can see that's going to affect the top padding, right? We're padding, so within this box, it's inside, right? Margin would be outside, so we're inside this box here. Padding for our content, 50, and we blow that out to 500. Ooh, that's crazy. So if we blow that out to 80, we could see that changes our right, so top right. And then our bottom, which is 30 here, we can already see what that looks like, but let's expand that to 40, to 50, and then 0 on our left, right? So we're doing a clockwise motion when you do your shorthand stuff. So top, right, bottom, left. If you're excluding some of this stuff, like here we have 3, this should be top, right, and left, and then bottom, right? So we've got top, let's change this to 70, right and left. We see how that, oh, I'm in the way. Let's slide me up top. Sorry, I didn't do that before. So if we change this to 80, we've got top, we've got left and right, and then our bottom here, right, doing its own thing. And if you only have 2, then you have top and bottom, and then left and right. Right, here's our top and bottom, and here's our left and right. And we'll do this as pixels, and we'll make that a little more obvious with 40, right? So just a little refresher on CSS and shorthand. So we've written our CSS here in layout.module, what is it? Module.css. And here's our little note, right? This is our correct way to do this. Use CSS modules. The CSS file name must end with .module.css. Now, of course, to use this container, we're going to have to import, and then we're going to have to add a class name. Import the CSS file and assign a name to it, like styles, right? As we would import any other thing. So this is, we don't need a default export on this thing, but we can go into layout. We're going to import this, import, and I'm going to call it my styles, just for the fun of doing it, from // and there's layout.module.css, right? And now we take our class name on here, and we're gonna be in JavaScript land, and we're gonna use my styles .container. Right, so what this is doing, in effect, is it's treating this like an object, like a JavaScript object, right? I'm assuming the dot, you know, we're still using a class name, but it looks like it's treating this whole thing. Like if I had something else here, which we're going to play around with, let's call it dot whatever. And if we have background color of red, right? And in my layout here, if instead of doing .container, which let's go look first, my postie, you can see it's shifted as we looked over here, right? It's got our padding here now. But if I do this as .whatever, right, now the whole thing just goes to a red background. And this is all classes. So I wonder what it would do if I did an ID, right? Let's play around. We'll do background color of green. And let's see if I do dot something. I assume this won't do anything. No, right? So this looks like it's more specifically just for classes for us. Maybe we'll learn about that as we continue to read on. But we've got our dot whatever to access our different CSS styles laid out in here. So we imported the CSS file and named it as we would do with any other import. We use styles.container or style.whatever our class name is as a class name in brackets because it's JavaScript and it needs to figure that out, right? We're not doing this as a specific like text or whatever. And we saw our update, which is awesome. So automatically generates a unique class name, right? Which we can go see if we look at our first postie page and we go and inspect this thing in the console. And this is what I mentioned before Svelte was doing as well. Not in the console, sorry. If we look in the elements here and we've got our body and we look and we see our whole big box here, right? If we hover this, we go down to it, we see our div with a class of layout underscore whatever. We just called this whatever underscore CTTGO, right? And this is the way that Next.js is handling the names of our classes to ensure we don't have any kind of class collision and accidentally style something in a way we're not intending to do. Automatically generates a unique class name as long as you use the CSS modules. You don't have to worry about class name collisions. Awesome. Furthermore, Next.js's code splitting feature works on CSS modules as well. It ensures a minimal amount of CSS loaded for each page, resulting in smaller bundle sizes. Cool. Quick review. Which of the following styling methods does Next.js not have built-in support for? I'm guessing styled components, right? Because it's in the third-party library that we need to do. I forget what I read. Correct? Good job. Hey, we did it. Excellent. Global styles. CSS modules are useful for component level styles, but if you want some CSS to be loaded by every page, Next.js has support for that as well, thank goodness. To load global CSS to your application, create a file called pages/_app.js with the following content. So we'll go to our pages and make a file called _app.js with the following: export default function app with the component and page props here, and turn component with our spread operator, page props, and a self-closing tag. Let's spell function correctly. There we go. The default export of _app.js is a top-level React component that wraps all the pages in your application. You can use this component to keep state when navigating between pages. Interesting. Or to add global styles as we're doing here. So we're not going to deviate from this yet, right? We're still learning about CSS stuff. So let's stick here and not navigate out to this page. Restart the development server. Important. You need to restart the development server when you add pages/_app.js. All right, so let's go do that. And this is going to take a little bit of time. Let me first make sure everything is saved and we're good. We're down here and we're going to Control C and we've stopped. And now we're going to npm run dev again, and we'll let that load back up for us. Adding global CSS in Next.js, you can add, right? So we've got that file. You cannot import global CSS anywhere else besides this particular page. Okay. The reason that global CSS can't be imported outside of pages _app.js is that global CSS affects all elements on the page. Correct? If you were to navigate from the home page to our first post page, global styles from the home page would affect our first post page unintentionally. You can place the global CSS file anywhere and use any name. So let's do the following. Create a top level styles directory and a global.css file. Here, we've already got a styles directory. We've already got a globals.css file. Add the following CSS inside styles, global CSS. The code resets some styles and changes the color of the anchor tag. So we already got some stuff in there. What's different here? We've got some new stuff in the body. Let's take a look at what we're changing here. We've got some padding margin and font family stuff that we're eliminating. And instead, well, our same padding and margin, some different font family stuff. Now we've got line height and font size there for us. And we've got box sizing, border box already on everything. Our anchor tag is there. Let's do this just by ourselves. We're changing our color to 70F3. What is that? That's a nice little blue for us. Text decoration none. That's still the same. We've got a hover effect. And we're going to do an underline on that with text decoration. Great. We've got image already here, but it's going to have a max width of 100%. Height of display of block. Height is auto here. Let's do that. Why not? Finally, import the CSS file inside the pages app.js you created earlier. So we'll go back to our underscore app.js file, import. We go to the styles folder and our globals.css. Let me make sure everything is saved at this point. And that's our only addition now. So now if we go to our first post, we see that styles are applied. Any styles imported in app.js will be applied globally to all pages of the application. So everything. We saw just then we've had a jump in page size, right? We go look at our first post. We might not really catch this from earlier, but it looks like our text is bigger than it was before, right? Let's go ahead and remove that. And then we see that style change, right? So even though we have styling, right, with our module here, where we're getting our red background, that's the only thing that's being controlled there. All we have there is red background. So if we want to change our font size to, let's say, 20 pixels, now that should override anything, right? And we see a little bit bigger here. Actually, what that's doing for us, it looks like it's stacking on top, right? Because we have our global styles set to, what is it set to? 18 pixels. No, it's not stopping. I thought it was bigger than the 18. So it's just, this is just overriding now, right? So if we go look at this, both of these should be at 20 pixels. This is 40 pixels and 30 pixels. Let's continue to read about this. What does this say for us? Where can you import global CSS files? Yeah, I want to play around with this more. So it's not really going into the explanation of how this is working for us, right? But it just looks like regardless of what our component is, this is automatically, in effect, kind of like wrapping this app around everything, right? Is that the way that's working for us, right? Because this is default home. This is default function home. It seems like what this is doing is like when you export this, we've got our home component, and it's just automatically wrapping everything with this app component we've got now. Right, and styles are applied to app, and any children within app, right? If we look at this thing, children component, and then I'm not entirely clear on how this is working with the page prompts and the spread operator, but this is what I'm assuming is going on here. I guess if we dive into some more documentation later on, we'll learn a little bit more about how that's working out for us. Where can you import global CSS files? Only inside of pages app CSS, or our pages app.js, right? We learned that. We've got our globals that are here. We've got a module that's here. We've got a module that's here. Our index uses our home, which, you know, again, I guess we can have CSS files anywhere. It depends on how you want to have your file structure. All right, we've got a decent handle on that. I don't exactly understand let's mess with this a little bit more, right? If I want to take the font size out of globals, my font size is 40 pixels here and 30 pixels there. Layout is using mystyles.whatever. And my first post is within layout. We should be using mystyles.whatever. Let's see what happens if I throw an important flag on here, what it does. Nothing different, right? Like, it's definitely working. Now if I change this to 40 pixels, it makes this a lot bigger, but it's not 40 pixels, it's 80 pixels and 60. We've got an H1. These shouldn't be affecting it because this is a module. So let's look at my global. Is it something about the font family? No. Where do we have a 2M font size here? Because I see my 40 pixels isn't actually really being utilized. That's even crossed out. Where is this 2M coming from? So let's Control-Shift-F, search all of our files, and let's look for this font size 2M somewhere in here, which I don't see. What is happening? It says user agent style sheet. What it sounds like is happening, this stuff, right? We've got a user agent style sheet. So because we aren't using some sort of CSS reset, which is what I always do when I write CSS code, I do a CSS reset to start from scratch, complete scratch. That's going to allow me to not have any of these kind of hiccups, right? Like I am listing in my layout module that I want my font size to be 40 pixels. Clearly, when we look on this, my font size is 80 pixels here and 60 pixels on the anchor, right? Which shouldn't be the case if we're controlling our styles, but we are not controlling our styles here because click back on this, sorry, because every browser has browser defaults. And here, your H1 has a font size of 2Ms, right? So that's doubling what our 40 pixels is in this. I'm not looking at the anchor tag yet, right? But let's look at that. I think that's an H2 actually, right? And a font size 1.5, which is why we are getting our 60. That makes sense, right? 40 plus 20 is 60. So I'm not going to go through and do a CSS reset here, but at least we see what the problem is with our actual font sizes. Just something to be aware of when you're writing CSS, and this stuff matters. So what did we learn in this section? Well, we learned how to add global styles rather than doing everything in modules. You can have a global CSS document where you can, I guess if you wanted to, have your classes in here as well. But this is where I would be putting my CSS reset and making sure I'm starting from scratch, and then can put in my own specific things. Like if I want every H1 to have a specific style or every button to have a specific style without needing to go through and doing module specific imports. So easy enough and a good thing that we learned today. Polishing the layout. So far we've only added minimal React and CSS code just to illustrate concepts. Let's polish our page styling and code. Update components layout module. Okay. First, open the layout module that we created. I'm going to close my terminal again. Replace its content with more polished styles for the layout and profile picture. All right, sure. We've got our container already in there. We can put a header. We'll just copy this code over. So display flex direction column. So everything's going to line up stacked, align item center, and then a class of back to home, which I assume is going to be our link that we're going to adjust here. And with the margin on there. Create styles, utilities, module CSS. So we're going to create a set of CSS utility classes, which I love doing when I'm writing CSS. for text styles that can be reused across multiple components. So add a new CSS file. So instead of doing this in global, which is where I would also probably think to do it first, because I'm used to writing one CSS global file, we're going to write a specific one that's just in a module. So we'll do that in our styles folder. So here we are in styles, and we'll write our utilities.module.css. And I'm not going to type all this stuff either, but these are nice and following the t-shirt size way of setting these things up, right? We've got heading 2XL, heading XL, which this could also be XXL if you wanted to. Heading large, heading medium. Those things are very nice to use if you have consistent stylings across your page. So instead of doing everything a class name like big title or things like that, you can add these utilities, which are a lot nicer to work with. Anything else in here of note? Not really. You've got a list item things in here. Again, these are just standard titling. So now as you're writing your HTML, you can just throw in your classes and make that a lot easier for styling. Almost like you're using things like Tailwind or other, like Bootstrap uses your utility classes in its own way to just write your styles in there. You can use these utility classes throughout your application. You may even refer to utility classes in global CSS file. Yep, that's what I was saying just a moment ago. You could just write this in global. If you've got global set up, you could save yourself another file. Your global might have a lot of stuff in here. You might have a lot of utility classes. It depends on what you and your team want to do, right? Utility classes refer to an approach of writing CSS selectors rather than a method. Global style, CSS modules, blah, 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 blah. Great. Update the layout.js file. We're going to completely change this thing from what we've got here to something much more complex. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's not just copy the entire thing. Let's make sure we're doing our imports correctly, right? So we've got our styles already there, my styles. This might get funky because I'm not doing what they want me to do specifically. Import head from next/head. Import util styles from /styles/utils module. Now we've got image in here. I skipped around a little bit, my mistake. I'm going to move these around. Import link from next/link. And I'm going to make sure that the next slash imports are at the top, just for organization purposes. And we've got styles and utility styles. And let's go ahead and take all of this. This is still our layout, which now we are going to be returning. I'll change my styles to styles just so I don't have to do it throughout the entire code here. Styles.container, wrapping the entire thing. We've got our head, metadata, and favicon. We've got a bunch of metadata stuff in here. I'm not going to really go through. We've got a header. And within that, we are doing a conditional render, I suppose. It looks like here we're home. Styles.render is our class, right? Styles.header, excuse me. So it's just importing that. Styling, home, if home is a truthy value, then we're rendering this image, which we have to adjust this because our thing is a JPEG, right? And our gonna look terrible, but whatever. And we know this is Dale Cooper. We'll just adjust that. Our boy in there. H1 with our utility style on here, utility class and util styles module. And we're just importing name here, which right up here, we've just got const name is your name. And we've also got a export const site title up there. So if home is truthy, if we have a home value that's truthy, we do this stuff. Otherwise, we have a link that should generate. We have another image, which is still going to our same thing. So let me adjust that to JPEG as well. And it looks like it's going to use a border circle style here in the utility styles, right? Which is just border radius 9999 pixels. Okay, cool. And then we have another link down here, which is going to send us back to the home page, which again has some styling. We have a main tag with children on there, which is coming in as a prop from our layout. So anything that we've wrapped layout around right? As if like this, if this was layout, all this stuff is children. We've looked at that before. If we're not home, then this happens, right? And we render this link back to home. So that's all that code. Here's what's new. Meta tags. Describe the page's content. Boolean home prop, which will adjust the size of the title and the image. Back to home link at the bottom. If home is false, which you looked at. Added images with the next image, which are preloaded with the priority attribute. I also need to update the pages.index file, right? Because we don't have this home thing going on yet, right? Which home is coming in as a prop. And we don't have home anywhere else. But let's go update our index, right? Replace all the content with this. So we've got from our layout page, we're going to bring this in here. We don't need a link here anymore, it looks like, right? Because the link's all handled in our layout file. So we're importing layout and site title, which was our default export layout. And also we're exporting site title, Next.js sample website. And we're not going to do the regular styles anymore, but we will do our utility styles that we made. And then let's get rid of all this other code we've got in our home file. Let's go ahead and replace the entire thing, including all that style stuff at the bottom that we didn't even really look at. And here you go, right? This is that layout, which has just got home there with nothing else, which is interesting. We've got our head, which is bringing the prop of site title in with it. Let's expand this out because I really want to look at some of this stuff. We've got layout, and let's bring our index to the side. So on the left is our layout file. There it goes. On the right is our index, right? So we're using layout wrapper over here, right? Because that is our default export layout, which accepts the props of children and home. Whatever is within that layout wrapper, that is our children. And then we see home is here. I'm not entirely sure what that's doing yet. We've got home. So within layout, we've got a head as well, which here we've got title, which just is site title. So we are curiously importing site title from here and using it here to pass it back into itself, which is a little weird. I don't quite understand why that's happening. And then here we have a section where we're just styling with one of our heading styles, right? Which is heading medium, which all that's doing for us here is just a font size and a line height. We have your self introduction in brackets. And then this is a sample website. You'll be building a site link on this in our next tutorial. We've just got home in our index.js, which this means this is home, right? So I guess in effect what this is doing is doing this, I guess, right? This is just a true or false value, the way it's being used over here in our layout component. So if I'm passing in home, and this looks like kind of a shorthand to do that, home is true, right? Because in this case, we're just wrapping layout around everything. And my guess is that the next thing we're going to do would be wrapping layout in our post file, maybe, where we wouldn't pass home. And then the alternative stuff would be rendering, right? So this is making sense now. So in this case, we are passing our home value with what looks like a shorthand to just say home equals true. Home is true here, so we're rendering our image and this H1 with the name. And then if it's not true, we pass in this link stuff, or we render that link stuff. So let's save all this. I don't know if this is all done at this point. Can I see what's happening over here? So let's go back to home and look if we can actually walk through this code a little bit more once my lag stops and this will extend itself out. Now it's not super easy to look at the stuff back to back where we are here, right? But there's our layout wrapper for index. Remember, index is our main landing page, 300, right? We pass in home. We have our site title. This just is our self-introduction thing, which is this. Here, home is equal to true, right? So let's expand this out a little bit. So we're just rendering our image with our border circle. We saw that border radius of the 99999 pixels, right? This is our image, that's it. And we have an H1 with our style, The only thing that's being passed in there is name, right? Which is your name up here, which was the value we declared. So we can change that. And let's replace your name with Dale Cooper. I'll save that, and that should update over here. But if I didn't pass this home value in here, and we're still on our 3000 here, right? We're still passing this stuff in over here, right? Your self-introduction. This is a sample website, but it's just not using this anymore. Now it pops over here, and it still has the image, right? It still has the border circle. It has changed here, our height and our width. And you can see if I hover over this, I don't have an alt tag now. We'll go back and we'll relist that home value again. And now we've got a back home link that's down here as well, right? So let's go back over here. Let's undo what I did. And let's do this way. And let's put a true value there, right? And we can just kind of show to ourselves that this is, there you go. You see our refresh over here. That's that shorthand that's using for us. Right, so I don't need that there, but that's in effect what it's doing. And we lose that link at the bottom, right? Because now we see it's doing the first part of this ternary operator, where it's saying if home is true, do this styling here, this stuff, this render. Otherwise, do this stuff. Cool. This is making sense for us. Replace self-introduction with your self-introduction. I'm not going to do that, but it would look something like this is what we're seeing. And there we go. We've done a lot there. Let's see what's going on here. Why are CSS modules useful? They scope styles at the component level. We know that. And then we're going to end with some styling tips. No actual changes in here. Using CLSX library to toggle classes. That's just a suggested library for us. Customizing post CSS stuff. I'm not going to dive into this using Sass. But okay. So it was really interesting for us to break down this final example and how they did some of this stuff in here. A really neat way. And again, this is a lot of what this series is meant to do, is diving into documentation, diving into coding examples, understanding things that are being done and why they're being done, and really take time to understand how to use these libraries or these frameworks that we dive into and we look through. I mean, you know, I don't know that I would write this thing specifically this way. I think this is maybe a little bit contrived. I'm not really sure. But to have all this code, just tell me if I'm home or not and add a link at the bottom and do this link. I mean, it was a fun example to run through. There's definitely a lot going on and a lot that we understood here happening. But I think at this point, we're going to call this one a wrap. Thanks for following along, Documentation Nation, with another fun episode. We're learning Next.js, and I'm enjoying myself. I'm excited to dive more into the next things we get into, specifically the API routing. But we'll take our time and we'll go through this document and we'll get there. Hope to see you in the next one.